Welcome to the Outcast Intellectual Podcast. Crislin returns for the compelling sequel.
Happy to be here.
Today we're just going to be focusing on kind of like the limits of like popular psychology, maybe like the misunderstandings that people have from it. And I figured this would be like an interesting topic to try to focus on because once again, I want to make use of like our difference in background. And whereas like last time, I don't even know if there was supposed to be a topic for last time. Or if it was just psychology. And we just
really focus on anything in particular. That's for sure.
Yeah. So I figured, so yes. And one thing that, speaking of the calls that we've done outside of this one, Jared did one 2 days ago, I want to say, 2 or 3 days ago. It was nighttime. And it was a pretty intimate call. It was just, actually it was him, then Maddie, not one person leaving and the other person joining, then Maddie, then Connor, and so people who, if you're viewing, may have no idea who these people are, but they're cool people. And then I joined after I had a brownie. And so I swear this is related. And at one point, my buddy Connor was talking about he had been wondering like why some people will pull through and some people will not. When you think of like, for example, like copywriting was what they were talking about. Because there are a lot of people like targeted for stuff to join marketing, and then they try to do it and they have all these misunderstandings about it. And then they just kind of, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then there are people who feel like they know absolutely nothing about what they're doing. And somehow they're like, oh, well, I don't know how, but I'm paying the bills. So this is nice,
Yeah, I can relate to that second one.
and I mean, that's the thing is like, I made a point of mentioning those two examples because, I mean, you'll see the people who seem like they're just freaking visionaries and they're like coming up with all kinds of stuff from like the beginning, and they just seem to like completely just take off. And of course that person's going to be successful. Like nobody's going to be surprised that that person, becomes success at whatever. But he was just wondering like, what is it that will make people be successful even in just the basic context. And one thing that occurred to me, which maybe we talked about on the other one, neither of us would know, was the multiverse. If we both had a podcast, I feel like calling it just the multiverse of madness would be kind of something. But there's been an understanding, and I'm not sure how widespread this is in the psychological community. You could probably have a better idea of that than I would, obviously. But people still think in terms of this isn't the name of the theory, but it sounds cool to me, like the fixed gene theory, where basically, there's like the genetic disorders of one kind or another, and that you are this way, you are that, you are this, and it's not your fault, as I like to say, and everything, but it's like, but basically you're stuck with it. So there's nothing wrong, but everything's wrong. And from what I understand, there's more of an understanding developing, at least within the actual community, though I may be off base with it, where they're understanding that there are genes that can have the potential to exhibit a given trait in that case, which is not a surprise in other cases because you'll have people who are blonde and everybody else is brunette. Like, why the fuck am I blonde? It's like, just because like nobody is exhibiting a trait doesn't mean you don't have it. And so that was the first thing that occurred to me, because once again, and maybe this is a little bit beyond the popular psychology beliefs, but I was reading a book by Joe Dispenza, and I know that he's like very much more on like the what is considered like the woo-woo end of things, but the way he was looking at it is that you can turn those off once they've been turned on, and I think that that is probably the the place where the people that I learn from and such is not aligned with like the psychological community, because I don't think most psychologists think you can turn off schizophrenia. You know what I mean? Stuff like
Yeah,
that. So no.
I would say yes and no.
Go.
I'm trying really hard to remember what the technical term is for the when you have a gene versus how it's expressed, if that makes sense. So like you could have genetic markers for something like schizophrenia, but never see it expressed. Like those genes will never function in a fashion that shows schizophrenia, even though you have that's part of your DNA and it could develop, or it had the potential to at some point. So I'm like pissed at myself. I can't remember what it's called. But in any case, yeah, that is like kind of a phenomenon we're still trying to fucking understand, is why do some people have genes that we know are related to certain things or disorders that choose to not express themselves while other people do. And our best guess from what I know about this research is that it is solely dependent on environment. But also, we don't 100% know what parts of your environment are triggering or suppressing this gene expression, right? So I kind like, to me, it sounds like what you're saying is like biohacking your genes to not express themselves in certain ways. Am I kind of on like the right track with that?
Yeah, I mean the way that he talked about it was very energy based, which I can expand upon, but obviously it's very much different from simply the you know the notion of it. But yeah, basically to put it very simply, um, based on like the energetic understanding that he was talking about, was that essentially by altering certain things about like how you are and so on, you change your vibration, and that vibration, because of the nature of cells and how everything actually works and quantum stuff, and which is why I'm not going even deeper than that. Um, it essentially, like those diseases and such, vibrate at a given level, and by vibrating at a different level, it will turn it off. That's where he was coming from with it.
So I think it's kind of important to remember that like none of this shit exists in a vacuum, right? Like
Right.
psychology and how we view things on its own isn't separate from what you're talking about. And just because we don't understand something and it doesn't fit into how we use a scientific method or how we test hypotheses doesn't mean it's not relevant. That's on a personal opinion. I don't know that, I think most people could agree with that. That being said, I think there is room for this kind of shit about like, what is the frequency level of this energy and how does that impact stuff? But I do think it sort of tiptoes into, I don't want to say pseudoscience because that sounds really shitty, but I do want to say like less traditionally scientific methods of testing hypotheses, right? It's really hard to objectively measure what we mean when we're talking about like, maybe it's not, maybe I'm just pretending it is, but like when you're talking about like these frequencies and this energy and like how do I measure that, right? How do I know? And I think once we can do that, then we can start to incorporate these two things a little better. But because we can't right now, I don't think that means that we dismiss it entirely, right? Because I think that's the feeling that you get. Well, nobody's studying this, so obviously it's not important. And I think what it comes down to is availability heuristic, right? Like people want to study things that they've studied recently. So it comes down to like what we're focusing on is what we sort of have focused on. And this idea of being able to identify the measures that we would use to bring something like this into psychological research. So like, I think those are some of the limitations right now, which doesn't mean that they'll always be there, but like, I personally would love to see a world where there's room for us to like look at some different types of angles of things like this, like frequencies, like especially some of like the old Eastern treatment philosophies that have been around for like thousands of years. Like we do sort of study those, but like maybe there's better ways we could measure what's going on and why things impact people the way they do. But then you tiptoe into like woo,
right,
or like something that's not as scientifically obvious. And people, yeah.
And even the notion of what that would mean, because at some points, I mean, at one point, the notion that we in Earth could be not the center of the solar system, I'm sure they didn't call it that at that time, was woo.
Right.
It's crazy to us because we're here, but back then it's like, same thing as the world being flat, though some people went backwards again anyway. So,
I love that comparison though, guys, because like, yeah, just because we live right now and we feel like we know certain things to be 1,000,000% true and certain things to be 1,000,000% false, we're definitely fucking up in a number of ways that we have we just don't have the angle to see it from yet. And like, I always joke with my husband, like, I hope that when I die, I just want to spend like 4 hours, like 500 years in the future, right before I die. I just like want to see what is our like, oh, we're gonna cure hysteria with a vibrator, or like, that kind of shit. I want to know what we got so fucking wrong that we're gonna look back and be like, oh my God, I can't believe we used to do that. I can't believe we used to think like that. I can't believe we used to think the fucking earth was flat. And if you didn't think the earth was flat, we were gonna hang you from the gallows. That's crazy. But there's definitely, we are doing that right now with some things. We just don't know what they are. And I really want to know before I die what they are.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is just how fear obsessed the world is, though that I feel myself going off on a tangent already, so I'm gonna stop myself before I can. But to go back to what you were actually talking about, rather than what it led me to thinking about, being able to measure things and such. The interesting thing about Dispenza is that he even, I already put the book in my other room, but he has like inserts in the book that I read that like they actually have been measuring things, because he is a doctor and not doctor, because I know like if you could put doctor in front of it, you could be like a freaking veterinarian and then do like these other experiments, but it's a doctor.
My favorite is chiropractors that get to be doctors.
I mean,
I want to be a doctor. It's not fair. We're school. Sorry.
To be fair,
yeah.
If you're going to trust somebody with your spine and all the other different things, you probably feel a little bit more comfortable if they're a doctor, what they do.
I'm just like, if you look at the training of chiropractors versus like medical doctors, it's like very different. I think it's like 3 years total. And I'm just like, bitch, I want a DR in front of my name. It just took you 3 years. Like, come on, not fair. Anyway, that's a conversation.
I find it more concerning that somebody who could potentially cripple you for the rest of your life is, that's they have less education somehow. So not necessarily, obviously.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, because they're the ones who are amazing.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the measuring, the cool thing about dispensing is because, that's something that actually all of the books I've recently read about like energy and stuff like that all directly acknowledge that like the big thing is like, how do we measure? And that's why the scientific community, I think, for the most part, has not embraced things for so long, because how can the scientific community embrace it when the scientific method cannot test it effectively? Which, that's fair. That isn't just people being narrow-minded.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, just because it doesn't fit into our system of how we do science doesn't mean it doesn't have value or that it might not work. Couple things here. First of all, the placebo effect is one of the craziest fucking things in the world, in my personal opinion. The way that your brain can be like, oh, we're supposed to be getting better. Cool. We feel fucking better.
Right.
What? That's what? So that's insane. That
And
being
it can
said,
do the opposite too. It can
yes,
cause things.
yeah, that's why like this, I know you hate the term mindset, but like when we're thinking about like
Healthcare, I hate more than that, but yeah.
yeah, but you know what I'm saying? Like the way that your brain chooses to think about certain things can have a chemical, physiological impact on how you heal and how you operate. Literally, just by like, you basically have this like fucking ball of meat with electricity in it inside of a fucking skull cap that's just doing its own thing. And that's insane. But to your point, just because we can't measure it with our current method doesn't mean that there aren't things going on. And I brought up the placebo method for two reasons. First of all, we don't really understand why it happens or how it works. We just know it's a fucking thing, right? The last I knew about like the research on placebo effect, it's very mysterious to us, and we don't have a really great understanding. We just know it's fucking broad strokes across the board. Everybody, we see it everywhere. So there's that. And just because we can't understand it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That, and somebody may have said this fucking energy shit, that's my shit. And then somebody was like, no way, that's your shit. That's fucking my shit. And now we have like this domino effect, right?
I want a conference put together by Crystalline where it's just like the my shit. I don't know, whatever it would be.
You don't want to be public speaking. This is probably as close to public speaking as I'll ever get.
I don't know. I think I'd enjoy that. But sorry, yeah, not to interrupt.
No, it's just, I guess my point is that I really do agree with you in the fact that just because we don't have an operationalized way of measuring, it doesn't mean that it can't be part of science. It should be more inclusionary into like, and again, like the word pseudoscience is, the perception of that word is very negative. When you hear pseudoscience, my initial automatic thought is bullshit science. Someone's trying to sell me for money, like snake oil salesman kind of shit. Fucking Gwyneth Paltrow sticking a jade egg up her pussy. Kind of, obviously you don't know what goop is, but anyone else would have gotten that reference.
Any other female, at least.
Yeah, maybe not.
And some of the more interesting males, I guess.
Yes. But my point being, it's things that you know, you really would want them to work, or like it would be cool if they did, but most of the time there's nothing backing that up. It's just somebody. But I think there has to be another category for what we're talking about, where it's like, we're not saying this isn't a legit thing. We're just saying we don't know how to explain why it is or isn't. Because like we can measure if the jade fucking egg in your vagina is doing whatever Gwyneth Paltrow says it's gonna do. If she's like, oh, it's gonna decrease your wrinkles and give you vitality, like we can measure your fucking wrinkles and be like, well, it didn't. So,
but then you would also need to like keep literally every other factor exactly the same and do the same routine at all times. And yeah.
Now you're talking about controlling for like external variables and whole other fucking follow wax there.
Because otherwise you can't say that it's that thing. Because you don't know. Because you didn't test it, because you didn't control it.
You can say whatever the fuck you want. And if we're going to get on the tiniest sidebar right here, let's talk about fucking research and studies. Let's go down this fucking rabbit hole about how when you click on a sales letter, when you click on an MSNBC, I don't know who your news source is.
Harvard scientist.
Yeah, whatever. You click on anything and you read research just fucking found out that insert interesting fact here, you know, volcanoes are 1 million years old, not 2 million. I don't fucking know what it is. Great. So they stated that fact. Where did they get that fact? What part of the article did it come from? How significant was what they said? So I'm working on a project right now and going through a very interesting research article, shocker, about CBD. And the way that the study is laid out was very interesting, but I have training in reading scientific articles and looking for certain things that would be a clue to like, this is fucking sketchy. What the fuck are you talking about here? Why are you trying to make me think this is more cool than it is, right? And so when you're looking through a study like that, it's purposefully written to be like, I am a big fucking deal. I use big words and they mean big things. Like nobody's
look at my giant academic dick.
Literally, how big is it? Well, let me just use another 50-cent word. And that does, I feel like that sucks because it limits who has access to actually understanding what the fuck is going on, right? Like everyone should be able to look at science and be like, oh, cool. So you tested Splenda and you found out that Splenda did this. Oh, that's really interesting. That's good for my health to know about. But instead, it's like the p-value of the significance was related to the t-tests we did that we used this fucking statistical measure. No one knows what you're talking about.
They just want to seem as smart as possible.
Well, unless you have a master's in like fucking statistics or science or something. That's to me purposefully gatekeeping important information. And that's fucked up, right? There should be access to, I can't believe this doesn't exist, honestly. There should be access to real science that is not cherry picked, that is just the actual facts of how significant something was, how many times it was duplicated. So if it was like a one-off thing, we can be like, well, that was weird. How many people were in each study? Bitch, I can't tell you how many fucking articles I read where they're like, we had 5 participants. You had 5 participants?
It was a scientific study, independent, clinically, like they throw in all those buzzwords to make you think that it could be,
Right. And that's the thing. And not to like fucking jump down the rabbit hole of like statistics and the power, we use the word power when we're talking about how many participants are in a study because it's less powerful. Your results are less powerful if you have less participants, right? If I have 5,000 people and I'm like, yo, I did this to 5,000 people and here's what I found. Isn't that a lot more impactful than me being like, yo, I did this to 5 guys I found in the backyard of my park, the fucking swing sets. Half of them have like the needle still in their arm and this is what I found.
That sounds like something off of Pornhub, not something from a scientific study.
Right. So that's another part I look for that maybe you wouldn't look for, or maybe somebody that's not familiar with like what they should look for in research. So I just got on a little tangent, but let me bring it back.
Okay.
When we're looking at, I love to use the example of the baby Mozart study. Everybody wants them, baby, you probably don't because you hate babies, but for everyone else in the,
No, I know about the Mozart thing.
Right.
I mean, I do hate babies, but I also know about the Mozart thing where,
yes.
Playing Mozart's supposed to like make them more intelligent and so on.
So someone with no babies who hates babies knows about this. Think about what that means as like a popular culture reference of science, okay? If you know what I'm talking about, most people know about it. True or false?
Right, probably.
That study is bullshit. Yes, it happened. Yes, they found that like listening to classical music helped. I don't actually remember the final findings, but like helped with intelligence or calming a kid or whatever. But it wasn't significant. And that is the standard in science. When you're saying this does this, you have to look for how significant it is. If I was like, this pill is going to help you lose weight. I did a study, it said so, and you lost an eighth of a pound, you still lost weight. It did what I said it did.
And if it only happened for you, you lost weight, but it wasn't like, what do you call it when you can like repeat it? Repeatable, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that is another extremely valid point. The Mozart study has been duplicated and not found those results. But do you hear about that in the media? You do fucking not, because it was cherry picked. That result was picked because it made a good story. And it really did, because not only did it make a good story, but it made for really great baby Einstein products and baby Mozart products. People made a shitload of money off of that study. And it's bullshit.
The best thing about it is that because it's supposed to help the baby and not the person, there isn't even a placebo effect because the person is not the one who would benefit from it. So they can't even think it's going to work. And then it does work because they think it will. Oh.
Actually, this is interesting. So my background is in educational psychology, There has been a repeated study that looked at both humans and rats, actually. And this is why it's so important when you see double blind study or single blind study, because having the researcher know who had the drug or whatever and who didn't, they have certain expectations and they look for certain things. They are more likely to find certain things. So real quick summary of what this main study found. They told a bunch of teachers that they were giving all the kids in their classrooms a intelligence test, and it was going to show who was a really bright student and who was maybe gonna need more help, right? Yeah. So it was completely invented and made up, and they just randomly assigned students into each group. This is the bright kids, this is the not bright kids. And then they just told the teachers which kid fell into which category. With nothing else, obviously, I don't want to say nothing else because shit happens all the time. But for the study, they didn't do anything else. And by the end of the year, the children that they had assigned to the bright category had better grades and better outcomes than the children they assigned to the not bright category. And that was because of the teacher's expectations of the children. It also happened in rats. So it's not just kids. A bunch of researchers were given certain rats, and they were told that this rat was a special breed of rat that was bred to do the maze faster. This rat was a normal rat. They were the same fucking rats. But guess what rat did the maze faster?
The ones that the people were interacting with it as if it was meant to be. Yeah.
So when you say the baby can't have the placebo effect because it doesn't even fucking know about the study.
So the way they raise it could directly affect. Okay, so the placebo effect of the parent affects their perception of the child, which means that, okay.
Yeah, so this is when I say
so they do work.
Yeah. It's hard to account for those variables, right? How the fuck do we know if it's because you assume your baby's going to be so smart and bright and wonderful, or if it's because they actually listen to Mozart? We don't fucking know. And we don't really have good ways of parsing that out to figure out what the fuck's going on. So if you've learned anything here today, kids, it's that science is made up. The rules don't matter. The points don't matter. Yeah.
And we don't even have Drew Carey to talk about it. So,
Oh my God, can you get him as a guest on the podcast? That'd be great.
Someday, maybe. I don't know what he's up to these days.
He does The Price is Right, bitch. What do you mean you wonder?
I don't watch cable, bitch.
I'm sorry. He's the new Bob Barker. I love Drew Carey so much. I grew up on the Drew Carey show. And I think he's fucking hilarious, and I love him.
I don't think I ever really watched the Drew Carey show, but I know that I think I saw a little bit of that, but I was getting sidetracked real quick to make sure that Bob Barker is still alive. Sometimes they're just like those really fucking old people that you haven't heard about for a minute. And you're just like, are they still alive? Okay, so Bob, you can be okay, everybody. Bob Barker is still alive. But yeah, the interesting thing, and I think that ties back into the measurability thing, because it's possible to bring rants back. But that's the funny thing, is that the nature of measurability, provability, and so on, it's kind of bullshit. Because, and what you just mentioned, is that people can doctor the studies. They can be not doctored, but still be biased. They can, even who is providing the budget for the study is inherently important, because sure, maybe even the study would be a double-blind study, but the fact that somebody needed to pay for it means that somebody had a reason to want to pay for it, which is itself a factor of the study.
Yeah.
Which is why you will have studies that prove this and studies that prove the opposite, because there's a reason why those studies were conducted, which was to prove that that was the case, even though they might not say it. And so what you end up having, what's up, Andrew? This is Andrew that I know that you don't. But
Hi, Andrew. That I don't know.
And what you'll have there is that you'll have people say, it's like, oh, like, and this is part of the reason why so many marketers were not convinced when the main hysteria was going around for the last 2 years, and why people were, like, why they just were just so many of them were so underwhelmed, because we know how this works. We know how persuasion works. We know how dropping in authority and this Harvard study and this thing and that thing is, not that it's bullshit, because ideally as like a marketer, you want somebody where what they're talking about is true, because it makes everything so much easier.
Right.
I think people still have the misconception that like all marketers are just there to like convince somebody that they need something that they don't. But at least in my experience, it's always been like, and I don't want to have to do the extra work of convincing somebody they need something that they don't, because it's just more of a pain in the ass for me.
Right. Yeah, totally.
And so what you have with the science, with the measurability and the supposed more dependable nature of like scientific studies, and by extension psychology, versus what would be considered more the pseudoscience elements, it all just ends up being not a complete sham, but there's gray area, and you can't tell when the gray area starts and the solid lines, end. And the interesting thing about like Dispenza, for example, is that he would do like MRIs and such. Like he does the things that the scientific community does, and he at least has found some ways of measuring that we can already do that can be like directly affected by what they're doing, which was not interesting to me because I only care about the how.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like if something makes sense to me, then okay. I don't really care who said it. I don't really care what their background is, because the information is what matters to me. And so for me, it's like, well, if it's not true, then I will figure that out by my process of examining it. But to avoid digressing again, that is where the notion of, I think, the authority of what I call popular psychology, because there's definitely psychology as a field, and then there's popular psychology as in like the real world application of it.
Yes,
where people are getting diagnosed for every little fucking thing in the world.
Yeah, in an online quiz through BetterHelp.
Yeah. And nobody stops to guess that maybe because it's related to somebody making money in a business somewhere, that maybe we should rethink just how true a lot of it is. Because in marketing, for example, and this is something I talked with Connor Inch and Jared and Maddie about, because our buddy Connor Inch is like, he wouldn't have a problem with me mentioning it as far as I'm aware. I guess I'll find out either way. I'm diagnosed with ADHD and stuff like that. But the thing is, in marketing, it's almost become, and I'm not saying this applies to him, and I made it clear to him then, it's almost become fashionable to say that you have ADHD. I don't know when it fucking started. Maybe people just want to be like Stephen Georgi or something like that. But it's like, and to an extent, see, this is the reason why I always had an issue with disorder, because it's bullshit. At the end of the day, every single thing, and you and I have talked about this, but I don't know if we talked about it on that podcast episode. So if we're repeating ourselves, well, too fucking bad. It's my podcast.
Keep watching
it. Where I don't know what the official term of disorder is, but at the end of the day, the only thing that would be a disorder is something that, to me, to simplify it, removes options.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
The actual, when we're talking about like mental health disorders, what we're really saying is that it interferes with your ability to function in your life. So, for example, I have a phobia of driving, but I also have generalized anxiety disorder. And at one point, it got so bad, I couldn't leave my house. That was interfering with my ability to like live life as a normal fucking person. Similar with like autism, ADHD. You know, my specialty was diagnosing learning disabilities within the school setting, and that is paperwork law different than just a regular psychiatrist or psychologist in a regular practice saying you have ADHD or you have autism. When we do it in the school system, it follows federal law for schools, and you have to meet certain criteria, one of which is that it impacts your learning. You can have autism and it does not impact your learning. There are these disorders express themselves in different ways for different people. It's very individualized. We see certain trends that characterize these disorders, but it doesn't mean they present the same for everyone. So that being said, when you're asking what is a disorder, my professional opinion is a disorder is something that interferes with your ability to live your life in like a functional, for lack of a better word, normal way. So if your ADHD is causing you is the sole reason you are missing deadlines and unable to stick to getting a piece of work done and whatever, that's impacting your life. At the same time, my other thought on this and the idea of ADHD being fashionable right now is you can have certain characteristics of certain disorders and not have that disorder. So the way that we say, Isaac, you have ADHD is through the DSM-5.
Sorry, I was looking at the fly on top of my webcam. No,
Oh.
I'm just fucking with you. Oh,
So
yes.
actual diagnoses all come from the DSM-5, which is basically our big fucking manual. You can find any disorders DSM-5 criteria online for free. If you want to know what does it actually mean to be autistic, what do you have to meet? The Amber Heard trial. Everyone wants to know about like BPD and histrionic personality disorder and personality disorders in general. What the fuck does any of that mean? Go ahead, look it up. You can just Google.
I just simplified it as a crazy ass bitch.
That is fine too. My point being, usually for any DSM criteria, there's a list and it'll say must exhibit like 6 out of these 12 things within the last 6 months. So I don't remember off the top of my head what ADHD is. Like, there's also
like
there's 3 types of ADHD. There's inattentive, hyperactivity, and then combined type. But in any case, let's say you exhibit only 4 of those things. You don't meet the criteria to be diagnosed with ADHD, but those things probably still suck in your life, right? Like, those are still impacting you. And where did those symptoms come from if you don't have ADHD?
Yeah.
Where did you get ADHD, right? Like, on a personal note, I think it has to do with the rapid development of technology and the differentiation of like what our environment looks like now versus like 100 years ago, and how we haven't been able to, we're very good at adapting, but I think there are certain ways in which we haven't been able to adapt quite yet, which lead to certain reactions from like being a human animal person. As writers, we're in front of a computer all day, true or false? Like most, most of the day. That's not natural. Maybe that is correlated with these symptoms of ADHD.
Right. And I think a lot of that, because the thing is that I've read my way through psychology textbooks, but I didn't take a psychology course while I was in college. I took a philosophy course and a sociology course, but I never, and largely was my aversion to, what I call popular psychology. Sociology I found fascinating though.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that society likes putting a mirror to every individual and making them feel a given way about themselves, But it's interesting when you turn it around and face it towards society, and because it shows the biases behind different things.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people uh, don't feel like they make enough money, don't feel like they have enough time to themselves and their family. They hate their job, spend so much of their life doing it, and they probably don't enjoy doing that because they hate their job and so on. That doesn't sound like a healthy person to me.
No.
But
And
nobody says that that's a disorder because it's normal. And so what ends up being the stickler for me is that when something is normal or planned, and I know I sound like Heath Ledger from The Joker, no one cares as long as it's all going to plan. You have to do the little lick thing. But it's true.
Yeah.
Because you can be as miserable as fucking possible, but society doesn't care because you just have this disorder and now we'll just load you up with this medication, send you to a therapist, and continue doing your job.
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately what the attitude, comes down to. And they will prescribe things like, sure, they know the side effects of this medication and that medication, but they don't know if you mix these two medications together, specifically what they do, because they will lose side effects and gain entirely new ones. And not like a simple case of, oh, here are the side effects for each of them. It doesn't work like that because they also have their own synergy. And yet among all of this, they still prescribe it. And in a world full of miserable people who feel empty and are basically hopped up on drugs, if you think about it, society and the world wonders how school shootings and suicide and shit like that happens. It's like you are literally, think of it as an athlete that you load up with cocaine and PCP and tell to just keep lifting or keep running a marathon. Just keep doing it.
They're like, oh yeah, bro, I'm tired. They're like, we got caffeine for that. You don't need sleep, you need caffeine. That is kind of like the approach we take.
Yeah. And then they wonder why their bones break or whatever. It's like, oh man, that sucks. How did that happen?
It's
how did it not?
So let's just, for example, take depression. Let's take the same person that you're talking about that like wakes up, feeds the kids their fucking breakfast and makes them their lunches, doesn't get to spend any time with those kids, goes straight to work, has way too much to do at work, has to commute an hour each way to get there, gets home, the house is a fucking mess. They try to clean it up. They try to feed their kids dinner. The kids are fucking screaming, I don't know how to do my homework. Kids finally fucking go to bed and they're exhausted. That's their whole life. Maybe they get a shower. Cool, good for you. That is not, so if this person goes, I am depressed, and the answer to that is, here is a pill. It doesn't take care of any of the shit.
Right, your life still sucks. I mean, in a certain context.
Well, and we look at depression more as a physiological, like chemical issue. You can have situational depression, but like when we look at it as like major depressive disorder, it's more than just like my life is falling apart. It's like maybe my life isn't falling apart, but I can't be unsad.
But everything you experience and I'm not trying to interrupt, but like even when you watch a movie, if a character or a TV series, a character you love dies, it feels like somebody you really care about died. That is not just a mental experience, because I mean mental, it's brain. That is also a physiological chemical change in the brain. And so again, it's kind of like the pseudo authority of like, oh, well, this is just your experience. Oh, I'm just sad, compared to depression, which is this chemical in the brain. It's like when you're sad, that's a chemical in the brain. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so it's
totally. Yeah, you're not wrong.
So I didn't want to like completely interrupt. I just wanted like to give that context, because like even if your life sucks, you experience all the brain chemistry stuff in that case as well. I know I sound super educated, brain chemistry stuff, but
No, I hear what you're saying, and like to circle it back around to your point about like there's all these different things that are setting us up to have disorders. So is it a disorder if so many of us are having the same reaction to our environment, right? And the way we choose to treat these disorders with medications and talk therapy essentially. I don't know if I would classify like CBT as talk therapy, but it doesn't matter. Nobody's like, go outside more. And if you're depressed, like you don't want to get out of bed, so like it's hard to go outside.
You don't understand.
Right. But like, you know, it's cliche and nobody likes to hear it, but
Fucking works to an extent.
personally and professionally, a lot of things can be solved by just being outside in the sun, having your bare feet on the actual ground, not
It's called grounding, by the way.
it is called grounding. Honoring your actual sleep patterns and not fucking with them with like blue screens and even
Coming at me, Crystal.
What? Oh, yeah,
You coming with the fucked up sleep schedules.
Yep. Exercising. Just I know. Moving your body. Nutrition. Just hear me out for a minute. I love Twizzlers and I eat like a bag of shit. I'm basically a human dumpster. I'm working on it. But I am very aware that I am overfed and
Undernourished?
Yes, that's the word. I
Overfed, undernourished. That's a
Undernourished.
book. I can see it already. You know what I mean? Overfed, but undernourished.
That's
how XX, you know?
Yes. Well, actually, incredibly, back to ADHD, I was watching this TED Talk from this New Zealand-based researcher who was saying that they're doing studies about micronutrients in children with ADHD. And what they're doing is one group of students gets micronutrients, one group of students gets like Adderall, a regularly prescribed ADHD medication. And they're finding
Which is basically speed.
Yeah.
Isn't it like one thing separated from meth? Not to detract from it.
No,
but,
you are correct. It is it's an amphetamine pretty much.
Or your family.
Yes.
Sorry, continue.
But what they're finding is similar outcomes that last longer than the speed, because the speed has really good outcomes initially and they wear over time. We find that giving medications to children as they age, they can become less effective, but they're not finding that with regular ass micronutrients. And we're talking like fish oil, you know what I mean? Like they're giving kids fucking fish oil.
Right.
But it's because their diets don't have this shit in it.
Yeah, it makes sense. Oh, sorry.
No, that's pretty much what
It makes sense because in one case you are altering brain chemistry, you know, probably more chemistry as well, but you're altering brain chemistry to produce a topical change. That's probably not like technically correct. It's not probably not topical in that sense, but temporary.
Mhm.
Whereas in the other case, you're just giving the body what it needs to function normally. And again, it comes back to just the notion of what a disorder is and what it is and is not. I don't know. Do you remember Carl Watake? He's a buddy of mine, but he was at the Scottsdale. It's like he's
I
awesome.
definitely remember you, Carl.
Well, he is awesome. And and in the comment section, he recently spoke. The disorders are in fashion as a smokescreen justification for lack of accomplishment and fulfillment in life. Weaponized victimhood. It's not your fault. Take this pill and make it all better. Nature has some solid mechanisms for human care and repair. Also, epigenetics. He said those in separate things, but
Epigenetics.
Yeah,
that's the word I was looking for. Epigenetics.
See?
Yes.
See, Carl had your back, and you didn't even know who he was.
I love you, Carl. Thank you.
As should we all. As do I. But it does come back to the nature of like thinking about when people talk about disorders and stuff like that. It does go back to the notion of, oh, well, you were just sad, but this is depression. Now, I understand that in the sense of you were sad in this moment and it got better versus depression being something that is not like situationally caused. It is something that is caused by your own physiology, I guess would be like just the simplest way to mention it, where it's not like something sad happened, you are just like this. Yeah. And but the thing is though, is that there are some of these what are seen as like more woo-woo situations and like treatments will cure this. And we were thinking for so long that, for example, like cancer couldn't be treated. Now I'm seeing something where like supposedly could I forget which version of cancer it was. I saw it and it was like it was on Google. So if it's on Google, then it must be true. But
Of course. Yeah, that's how that works.
but even just the thing that it's like what you said before about like just do what a fucking human's supposed to do and maybe your life will be a little bit better, but people will dismiss it. And so it ties back again with me, the notion of like popular psychology and people, because I'm not optimistic when it comes to people.
I know.
When it comes to individuals, absolutely, and that's why like
Well,
people will be surprised sometimes because they'll think that I just have like a nasty attitude, but it's like no, I just see the piece of shit people are. That doesn't mean that individually, the person I'm talking to in this moment, I'm going to assume that they exhibit all of those characteristics. I'm not going to assume that they have the disorder of being a normal person. But
I don't think you. Okay, a couple thoughts. Remember when I was like, psychology doesn't exist in a vacuum? Another great example that you just brought up is like, obviously it doesn't exist in a vacuum because sociology comes into play, right?
right.
We're looking at the behavioral patterns of a whole group of people. And basically, to Carl's point, it is sort of, I can't remember exactly what his comment was, but it is sort of like the convenience of the group to say that that's a disorder. Is that what he said?
Yeah. Disorders are in fashion as a smokescreen justification for lack of accomplishment and fulfillment in life.
Which is a societal expectation. When you say lack of accomplishment and fulfillment in life, how do I know what I'm supposed to be accomplishing and fulfilling? Oh, my society tells me.
Right. And even if you decide if you were still conditioned and grew up in a given culture, which is going to be different than if you,
Yeah. And what do we think of as normal? And what is, you know what I mean? All of these things are societal structures that we have been, immersed in our whole lives. And it's very hard to know that you're a fish in water, right? What the fuck is water? You're in it. So it's hard to like sort of differentiate those things. So when we're talking about like disorders and proper functioning or normal functioning, it's all within this societal environment that we've created to be like, this is what we value, this is what we don't value. I think it's super interesting when you do look at school systems. Sorry to keep bringing them back up, but it's a good point. When we have kids that are neurodivergent or that are autistic or they don't fit with how school runs, right?
Is neurodivergent the new term for being retarded?
Okay. No.
She said yes.
No, it is not.
Behold, the conclusion of my scientific study.
Okay.
Licensed psychologist approves. No, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
You just really threw me off there. No, so the term neurodivergent is used mainly to describe the conditions of ADHD and autism, but it's basically anyone who's regular brain. It is a newer term, but diverging from the norm, essentially, in the way that their brains operate. But
yeah.
People, if you have severe autism and you have an aversion to certain sensory things like what are those, fluorescent lighting, noise, and you're in a school, think about that for a second. If your body feels like it's got fucking pins and needles in it and you hate everything every time you're in a fluorescent light, you're in a fucking school where all it is fluorescent lights, that environment is not set up for you. True or false? Right. So what we do is we try to find ways to get kids to cope with what we need them to do in a school so that they can learn because they're entitled to a free and appropriate public education through the law. Most of the time, I don't, with kids that have this kind of severe level of divergence from what being able to do what we expect kids to do in school, I don't think that's the right fucking setting. And most specialty schools still aren't all that different. But that is what society says you need to be able to do. You need to be able to go into a room and sit down and work because that is what, when you grow up, we need you to do. We need you to be a functional worker. And we have a very narrow view of what that looks like for people.
Right.
Even like in my new position where I get to work from home and sort of like dictate what my hours are and how much I want to work, and I get to choose all these different things. It's weird because I'm used to a place where I need to get dressed every morning, arrive on time, act professional, like do all these things that I've been literally trained to do my whole life so I can be an acceptable member of society. And that's where it comes down to, well, does someone with autism have a disorder, or do they just not fit into the world society tells us we have to fit into? Which
right. Because it comes back to the reality is that normal is really just average. The average of traits expressed by humans, if you really think about it. And the thing is that if you want to achieve anything in your life, you can't be normal. Because by definition, you are being different than the vast majority of people who are just doing another job. Which, you know, again, by the same token, does not. I refuse to use modern fucking. I hate all these goddamn words people are coming up with, marginalizing this and this. Like, I'm not talking shit about normal people by pointing this out, you know, because you need those people to, you know, to do all the working at the same time. But Elon Musk is not normal.
no.
People fucking worship him for it.
Well, that's
so
interesting.
Well, again, to be exceptional is to also be abnormal, because again, abnormal requires just not being normal. And so what you have is you can't be different than normal people, otherwise there's something wrong with you, except when the thing that's different about you means that you seem to be able to do things better than other people. And that also flies in the face of, and this is a reason why I just think most of the modern world is bullshit, because it acts like we're all equal, we all have the same potential and stuff, and then at the same time says, oh, by the way, like your brain's fucked. You know, but then they try, you know, they spin it and try to make it seem like that's not what they're saying. It's like, no, that's exactly what you're saying. And you run into a situation where, like, okay, if you have people who seem to be geniuses or whatever, if you have like an Elon Musk or whatever, okay, you have that situation. But then you also have people who seem very intelligent, who are working at like a fucking Target. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so once again, like that doesn't. So there are all these different factors, and the more you would just take them apart and look at them, the more you'd realize that the notion of normalcy is just bullshit.
It absolutely is. It is a schema in your mind, in all of our minds. We have created what it means to be normal based on what's around us. But let me ask you, do you think if somebody from the 1500s came and hung out with us for a day, they would think any of this shit is normal?
Right, exactly. Because normal is just the state of like how things currently are. And even just the notion of how people used to just like they literally put cocaine in Coca-Cola. Didn't think anything about it. You know what I mean?
But it sounds like a good time. Like,
well, but that's the thing that was like, but then you think about us, it's like, oh, like, well, it's like, wow, we're more enlightened now. It's like, and meanwhile, we would load our bodies up with caffeine. And so, you know, like at the same, but that's the thing is that there's nothing wrong with that because it allows you to do your job and doesn't make you kill people. You know what I mean? Not that Coke inherently makes you kill people, but you know, so it's just to kind of address what Carl's mentioning, because Carl's been keeping up with everything. So, and this may seem kind of random now because he made it when it made sense, but I said love many aspects of the Scandinavian Finnish educational model. Our model is very industrial era 1.0 remnant, which makes sense.
Absolutely.
Normal equals societal stability. Neurodivergent people equals push the boundaries and usher in progress. And the notion of like challenging what the notion of normalcy and stability would be. We need both, and nature is preserved and selected for both. Equality doesn't exist in nature, only balance, which is interesting too, because there's a group of people that I cannot fucking stand, but it's interesting why there is this group of people, which is the woke nation or whatever the fuck they call themselves. Dude, I saw that fucking the acronym for like the LG. Like, I'm not even gonna try to read it out. Do you know how ridiculous it is now? You would need to be a fucking chemist to like to just figure that out on its own.
Are you
Just like,
talking about the LGBTQIA plus community?
but there's like a 2 in there now.
The plus?
No, there's a 2 and there's like a number and a plus. I don't know.
I missed that. I didn't get the
This shit
update.
has gotten way out of hand. They have this new flag. This like, I'll share the meme with you later on.
I think what this is coming down to is people want to have the freedom to express themselves as individuals and not have to feel restrained by societal norms. And they're saying that's not, we're all fucking different. Like,
yeah, it's kind of like a modern age, like Bohemia, if you think about it.
Yeah.
You know, or like with the hippie movement and stuff like that, where it's interesting even how these are like trends, you know what I mean, that can continue to happen in society over time. It's almost like, you know, if you like, things will get repressed and then like groups of people will need to express something, but that's a completely different train of thought. But even just the notion that these people exist, even if one were to take the position that it's all bullshit and it's all insecurity, whatever, but even if somebody were to go to that extreme with it, there's a reason why a given number of people are doing that. And it's not just because it's a trending activity that some are doing. There's a reason why it's exploded so much. And I do think it comes back to that, what you mentioned, where it's like the notion of normalcy, and it's people trying to say, it's like, well, fuck you.
Well, and who's deciding what's normal? I don't want to fit into this picture of normal, or I don't fit into this picture of normal. So am I less valuable as a person? And I really think we're getting to that part of things too. Because I know how much you love drag queens. When you look at drag 20, 30 years.
Look at the time. No.
I think my point is, we don't have to get into that, but
no, it's like, I'm just
Gen Z, our up and coming Gen Z. I really fucking like Gen Z because their whole thing is like, I am unapologetically myself, whatever the fuck that means, and that's chill with me, and it should be chill with you. And like, I don't give a fuck what you do as long as it's not hurting me. Fucking be yourself, and like, that's cool. So
what's Gen Z again? Because I don't.
We're millennials. I think you're still classified as a millennial, even though you're younger than me. To all the people out there, I'm an old woman. But Gen Z, I believe, is like in their early 20s and like,
so like post 2000s or something. Basically.
Yeah, it's like people that are teenagers now to their early 20s right now is considered Gen Z. So it really is like the up and coming generation, right? That's like starting.
I'm up and coming.
No, we already came.
We've come multiple times.
We've been here. We've been around for a while.
But that's the interesting thing when it comes to, and I know that you'll have to get going in a few. I know we've gone over, but like the conversation has now weakened. So I figure, I don't know, would 11:15 work for you?
Yeah.
Okay. The notion of I should be able to just be who I am without it being a problem. Again, it goes. I think the fundamental nature of the issue that I take with psychology and such is that when it comes to evaluating human behavior, human emotions, human brain chemistry, all this other stuff, we can have all the scientific methods we want, but at the end of the day, we cannot account for the bias. I mean, we can account for it, but you can't too.
Right.
And so what you have is, you know, you'll have people that, like, for example, gender roles is socially constructed. It doesn't mean that there's no meaning to it at all, because, I mean, the value of words is kind of socially constructed too. So it's like, you know, you end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater if you say, like, just reject all societal norms of all kinds, because then it's like, well, then what does a word mean? Because there's no notion of what that, you know, represents. But you will have people who will try to establish their own identities, but it could be based on insecurity as well. because you have so many fucking teenagers deciding, oh, I'm not this, I'm that. How many different things did you think you knew as a teenager? And
Oh,
like,
so this is a very controversial topic.
good.
But having worked with a lot of teenagers that are struggling with different issues, and
Nerds.
remembering what it was like when I was a fucking teenager, you are, it is like someone put you in a blender where you're like still kind of a kid, but you've got all this like adult packaging, for like lack of a better word, and like your brain is functional enough. It's like the more you know, you don't know, right?
Right.
When you're a teenager, you're just at the very beginning of that, where you definitely know everything, right? I know I knew fucking everything. It's like the peak of like confidence and self-confidence, or I mean,
Yeah.
the lack of confidence at the same time. So first of all, no wonder it's just like a malfunctioning robot when you're a teenager and like everything is fucked.
Right.
It just feels like you're living in an actual cyclone. I do not ever want to go back to being a teenager. It doesn't matter how much you paid me. So I really empathize with these kids. And I really liked working with like 13 to 16, 17-year-old kids, because whoo-wee, are you at the worst part, honey. But shit, I lost my train of thought. Oh,
good job.
when we're talking about identity, right? And I think a lot of when there's concern here, most of the time it's related to adults helping minors navigate biological functioning due to identity concerns. Read between the lines there if you want. But basically,
White person talk.
Yeah, we're talking about like, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy, so my parents are going to let me take hormones or whatever.
When they may not, how would you know if this is someone who actually, even to assume that to assume that the notion of, okay, like I identify as a girl, so I should be able to become one, whatever. Okay, just say that that's okay, whatever. At the same time, to even assume as someone who's by nature of the age of their life knows very little and is very insecure and all this other stuff, how would you be able to tell the difference between someone who that would be the case, assuming that this is a black and white thing where somebody could just identify, whatever,
right,
and it's just an insecure fucking kid?
That
you know what I mean?
is, yes, because I've met those insecure kids that one day feel this way, and 2 months later feel completely different.
I'm gonna love them forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's really tough to know how to navigate this territory, because on the one hand, I want to be sensitive, and on the other hand, I want to be realistic. And on the hand that wants to be realistic, when we're talking about fundamentally altering someone's body and growth structure in a very important time period of puberty, where like this is a very important time for your body to decide how it's going to look and be and operate and all of these things. There's a lot to unpack there. And I'm not saying we cannot be supportive and understanding, and I think there's a line where we cross into enabling, though. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it would be something complex enough to address in its own,
Yes,
at least hour long,
I don't know that
episode,
I'd want to jump into this one for an hour, because it all, like, talking about it where people can see me talking about it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, because there's things that there's the shoulds and then the reality. Like,
That's
how
okay. You could just type it out, and then you could mention all the things you'd like to say that you wouldn't want people to see you saying, and then I could just say it like it's my idea. Because I don't give a fuck.
It's not that I think that I'm like taboo, what I think is taboo at all. It's that this is a very polarized topic, where, and a lot of things are these days, where like, if you don't agree 100% with me, if you don't think we should be able to let a 5-year-old decide if he's a boy or a girl or not, and then you're an asshole.
And
Or
on the other, it's like, what, do you have a dick? Do you have a vagina? There you go,
Or the other side is, if you think I'm going to let my 5-year-old boy wear a dress because he feels like a girl, you're an asshole. So like,
I like how you had to say it in like the Southern accent for a
well,
second. But not that it's not statistically relevant, but it's
no,
like,
and like to be fair, my nephew's father wouldn't let him wear a Pink Floyd t-shirt because there was a rainbow on it. He didn't want his son to be gay. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, you know what I mean? Like, now we're getting I see two very extreme sides of this kind of conversation, and I think I exist somewhere in the middle, which to me feels rare lately. It feels rare that you can just kind of float in the middle and be like, I see that side, and I see that side, and I kind of.
you can have your own mind. What?
Yeah, wow.
You're allowed to like not just like subscribe to Slytherin or Hufflepuff, basically. Dude, that's pretty much what it, except they would both be Hufflepuff. It would just be that would be awesome. That would be an awesome meme. You just have, like this side, that side, and like they're just two sections of the Hufflepuff emblem. It's like that'd be perfect.
Yeah, think for yourselves, guys. Everybody out there.
Yeah.
You don't have to agree with every single part of any topic or spice.
Carl said, "Leave the South out of this."
Leave the what?
Carl said, "Leave the South out of this."
Oh.
He was laughing because it was a good sense of humor. But yeah, I guess to wrap it up, and for your sake as well, because I know without the job responsibilities, we could have easily like gone on and on and on with this.
Be a 3-hour podcast.
We could do it.
Yeah, pretty easy.
We've almost done it accidentally.
Yeah.
Carl's like Team Slytherin. Yeah, probably. I would definitely be like. I think I would be a Slytherin too. But Slytherins make the greatest sacrifices anyway. The point being is that when it comes to people and the nature of people, it's always good to approach people's conclusions with a degree of criticism as well.
Mhm.
And criticism as in how we understand it, not how most people see it, which is skepticism. Because, a teenager doesn't necessarily know if, and this again, like, just because you don't want to work out and be this big macho dude does not mean you're a girl. But when you're a teenager, you don't fucking know that.
Right.
Because you're a teenager. You know what I mean? And so when you're talking about, the like diagnosing people, psychologists have backgrounds too. They can be wrong. And somebody can spend their entire life believing they're this thing and hopped up on this medication that literally does change their brain chemistry because somebody could be wrong. There's so many different areas of human flaw when it comes to these fundamental things, and people think that they're being objective. I know this one fucking stupid 20-year-old who said, I don't have beliefs, I think in facts. This is the same fucking person who said that he'd like gone up to Boston and ended up living with somebody who ended up being a cannibal or whatever. It's like, well, either you're full of shit. I mean, you're full of shit either way, but like you're either full of shit and that you see facts, or you're lying about this other, you know what I mean? So it's like, but that is an example of just how fucking stupid people can be about how imperfect we are.
Well, that's very inflexible thinking also. And like one of the final notes I'd like to touch on is the idea of an absolute truth, like, or an absolute fact, because again, it was an absolute fact that the world was flat. We absolutely fucking knew that. And now we don't. So everything that right. Well, everything you think you know for a fact, even the science, dig deeper into that article. If you think you know the science of something, really go in and see, well, like, what were the limitations of it? How do I actually know anything is a fact? The more you go down that rabbit hole, the more your brain starts to turn to mush.
Is the human brain capable of perceiving something as a fact, as discerning it from a fact, as opposed to just what the brain is capable of perceiving as well?
And now we've come full circle into philosophy.
Right.
What is a fact?
And psychology,
Yeah.
it's like, how can I perceive it? But I'm digging you closer and closer to the time when you have to start your thing. So,
but it was
yeah,
so fun. I'll
right?
come on and chat for hours anytime.
Hey, I mean, I wouldn't be against having you on here regularly. So,
Okay, well, I'm just let me know. I'll pencil you in.
cool. Well, it was awesome as always. And I always have to remember to stop the live stream before I stop the call, so we can actually say goodbye to each other.
Oh,
But for now, I hope that you enjoyed viewing this episode of the Outcast Intellectual Podcast that was definitely in control at all times with 0 tangents. Remember, I forgot.